I'm Jason Shea. I work for the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm a civil engineer. Been working there for 18 years. Started in 1995, New York District. 1999 I left, went to LA District for 4 years, came back to New York in 2003. In planning division the entire time. Civil engineering degree from New Jersey Institute of Technology. And I'm a 1990 graduate of Henry Hudson Regional. Planning division is where projects start with the Army Corps. When a town perceives a problem, they contact either the Corps or their politicians or maybe the congressman. Eventually, it gets back to the Corps to come and visit the town and see if there's federal interest in a project. We come out, see what kind of problems they have here. Either the congressman is with us or their staff is with us. We describe the process that the Corps has to go through. And planning division, if there's an authority and funding for a project, planning division initiates a study. Our responsibility in planning division is to analyze the alternatives in a report, complete that report, and send a recommendation to Congress for a decision to be made for construction. So our role in planning division is really the feasibility study and to screen and formulate alternatives and recommend a plan. Quite a bit right now because the Sandy bill, Public Law 113-2, funded all the existing studies that we had on the books fully, where you don't always get full funding every year for all the projects. So we have many projects in town. I don't know the exact number. I could tell you we have projects in or reevaluations or studies in South River, Union Beach, Port Monmouth, Leonardo, here in Highlands, Shrewsbury River, and the entire coast from Sandy Hook down to Manasquan. Manasquan South is covered by Philadelphia District. We, Congress prioritizes for us. They fund us. It's a priority. Now, we staff up as needed. If we're fully funded on many projects as we are now, it doesn't mean that schedules slip or we have to choose one project over the other. We reach out to other resources. We have engineers from our Baltimore district and St. Louis district and New Orleans helping us on several of these studies and projects. We have contractors that we reach out to staff up so that we have enough resources to complete all the work. We respond to the budget drills. Congress has their own priorities. How they determine what they fund is within their own subcommittees and committees. If a congressman contacts us and requests information or status or more action on a specific project, we do respond. But to say they prioritize us, I would say, is not correct because we are working within the resources we have and the funding we have to the schedule that we have. We do respond to Congress. They technically are our bosses. So if they make something a priority, we will make it a priority. Now, post-Sandy, all the Sandy projects are priorities. And we do have other projects in New York District, for instance, the Passaic River flooding. That has not slowed down because of Sandy. We've just resourced up. Well, the Highlands project started before I was with the Corps. I was in Highlands as a resident when the project started, or the study, I should say. The reconnaissance study was initiated in 1993. The study authority by Congress was passed in 1990, so I'm assuming it was appropriated in 92, maybe 91. The reconnaissance studies were much larger back then. That reconnaissance study focused on towns on the entire Bayshore. It was called the Raritan Bay and Sandy Hook Bay Reconnaissance Study to look at the types of problems in all these communities. Because of the funding was limited for these types of reconnaissance studies, we were directed to focus on Port Monmouth first. I don't know why Port Monmouth was chosen first. I think it was because it was a good example of the types of problems on the Bayshore. This is before my time. And then making comparison to the other towns in the Bayshore. Now, some of those were carried forward: Highlands, Union Beach, Leonardo, Keyport, and I believe Cliffwood Beach. And others were not, based on very low-level benefits and costs compared to Port Monmouth in a very general scale, saying similar to Port Monmouth, greater than Port Monmouth, less than Port Monmouth. Highlands was one that was significant, as was Union Beach, and Port Monmouth is still ongoing. We're actually very close to construction in Port Monmouth right now. Our projects are designed to reduce your risk of flooding and reduce damages for the future. And we base that prediction on past events. We look at the historical record. Now we have more based on Irene and Sandy. Before that, the 92 storm, the 84 storm. And we use that data to project out what will be the future conditions over the next 50 years. So our intent is to protect against that next 50-year event. Next 50 years of storm events. Our project life is analyzed up to 50 years. However, they're designed and last much longer than 50 years in place, especially a hard structure like a bulkhead that doesn't require a lot of maintenance, like a gate. We have projects on the books for nearly 100 years in upstate New York that are still operational, that we still inspect, and we still repair after storm events. We were trying to provide information on what we're doing, what our plan is. Because we were fully funded now to complete the study, we wanted to give the town an opportunity early on in this phase. I say early on in the fully funded completion of the feasibility phase, to get feedback, because conditions have changed post-Sandy. We were here in 2003, and the general consensus back then was the residents did not want to lose their view, and there was an acceptable risk of flooding in exchange for that view. And I understand that. There's decisions that people have to make where they live and the risk and the conditions and the trade-offs. So we come back now to present again. And the solutions are similar to what they were 10 years ago, but Sandy was unprecedented, and people now have experienced flooding worse than they've ever seen. This public meeting was more focused on access to the waterfront activities, whether it be their docks, the boats, the beaches. And that feedback was extremely helpful, because now we're directing our engineering team to go really analyze those access issues so we could come back next time and answer a lot of those questions and present different options for access and answer the questions on real estate. Who provides that access? Is it the Corps? Is it the state? What does it look like? And it's going to vary from place to place. So the feedback we got, I think, was extremely helpful on access, and we really need to focus on the access early on, because I think that will be what drives the decision making here in the town, of whether or not they want the project. When we came out to present, our intention was not to have the town decide today or Monday night on what they want to do. By no means does anyone need to make a decision at this point, but the feedback that we get helps us analyze those solutions a little bit better. Our formulation stage that we've completed in the past to get to this plan, it's conceptual in the way that we look at engineering solutions that are known. There's nothing innovative here. It's a tidal flooding situation. We know certain solutions that can be used here. We know the level that the water reaches during storm events. So we know what type of solutions can work here. And when we analyze what can work and what can't work, what's the most cost effective in each breach, that's when we lay this out. We take into consideration environmental impacts, wetlands for instance, real estate impacts. We do try to avoid private property to the extent we can. And we balance those and propose solutions. That's why you'll see in some cases it'll be a bulkhead, in other cases you'll see a dune. It depends on how much space you have and what the current land use is there. Some things won't work in some areas, and those are some questions that we need to answer when we go out and meet individuals or local communities. But the formulation process is something that we need enough level of detail in order to make a decision on which plan to recommend. And that's where we are. Now that we have this line of protection outlined, we can modify it a little bit here or there. We still have to tie into high ground. And coincidentally, this town, the way it's laid out, the two ends of the town are actually very close to the high ground. So we don't have to run a flood wall or levee very far back at the end of protection. We could tie in pretty close to where we're protecting, and that's a benefit to us, actually. I shouldn't use the word benefit, but that is makes it a little bit easier to provide solutions. Actually, the economics is what drives the solution and what storm event you'd be protected against. The economics is what our feasibility study probably looks at the most early on. What are the damages to this town, and what are the future damages predicted in this town if there's no project in place? It's called our without project condition or no action plan. So that's the no cost plan with a high amount of damages. When we put plans in place with costs, how much will that protect against? We'll look at for instance, with a 100-year storm event. We don't like to speak in terms of year events anymore because every time there's a new event, that changes. Every time there's dry years, that changes. So what was a 100-year event 10 years ago might be an 80-year event today. And it also varies by location. Sandy was a certain storm event in Highlands, maybe in Cape May was a different storm event. So what we are trying to explain with risk is percent chance of an event happening. So a 100-year storm event is a 1% chance on any given year. However, people are used to hearing storm events, so we understand that as well. For the sake of this question, I'm going to speak in terms of storm events, but when I say the year, relate that to percentage. We analyze the conditions here in Highlands, the existing conditions without a project in place for the 2-year, the 5-year, the 10-year, the 20-year, maybe 25, 50, 100, 200, and 500-year storm events. What are the damages on all those events? And then we put different scenarios in place, different heights of flood wall or levee or bulkhead at different elevations. And with each elevation, each foot increase costs money, but it also protects. And you have to optimize how high does it become most cost effective. Obviously, if you build a 30-foot flood wall, you will have no damages. But can you build a 12-foot flood wall and get almost no damages? So that's part of the optimization process. Right now, we do a low-level optimization where we're looking at roughly 12 to 14, 12 to 13.9 elevation protection. Now that we have a selected plan and we're going to start optimizing that and looking at it closer to analyze somewhere between that will be the most cost effective, whether it be 11.4, something very specific. So the economics will drive that decision making. There's always a trade-off between cost and benefits, and that is the entire basis of our project selection. The Sandy event was an extreme event in this area because of the way the storm hit the coast. The fact that the eye of the hurricane hit south of here, near Atlantic City, actually made the northeasterly part of the storm up near the New York Harbor and Sandy Hook Bay area. Those winds were coming in, driving the tide in for many hours. The tide coming in with the winds just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. So that's why down south in Cape May area, they had some flooding, but it wasn't as bad because those winds would be pushing the tide the opposite direction. So it was the location of the storm that was bad, the size of the storm, obviously, and it was just the line that it came up the coast and took that left turn towards the end. And incidentally, the models days in advance were showing this scenario almost exactly. The elevation of downtown Highlands is very low. You're talking about roughly 5 feet in much of the town, 5 feet above sea level, 6 feet. When the tide level comes in through the ocean into the bay at 13 feet, that water has to go somewhere, and it's coming over walls, around walls, up the beaches, through the storm drains, which is what people experience the most, where they see the most. The water is going to find its level at that 13 foot or whatever the exact elevation was here. And unless there's protection across the entire stretch, the water is going to come in. And here, it was just, Highlands was overtopped completely. There was not any protection to an event even close to that size. Generally, you're looking at an 8,000 foot line of protection from the west end of town near Locust Street. It's primarily a bulkhead beach dune plan, raised roadways, raised ground surfaces. all those raised ground surfaces, including the beach, have an interior flood wall inside of it. So the line of protection without the fill on either side is a flood wall. You have, when people say there's a wall around the town, essentially that's a true statement. Now, where we can, we will put sand over that wall on both sides, sloping it down so you could have access over and access the water. In ground surface, you could have it slowly, gradually come up and back down so it could be driven over where you have room. So the plan for Highlands is to protect against that tidal event. You need to have a certain elevation, and you need to have that closed off at both ends. If you have one opening, the water's coming in. So it's an entire line of protection. You can't piecemeal it. You can't protect one section of town and not the other because it won't close off. A good example are those sheet pile bulkheads on Marine Place. They're a little bit higher than the rest of the town. Essentially, they don't do anything by themselves. They don't function. The water goes around them. The reason that they're there because they were built by the state to repair the existing bulkheads. And when they come in and repair, they repair to the latest standards required, realizing that it doesn't work until you close it off, but as you repair bulkheads in phases through the future, eventually you would meet that line of protection. So that was the thought process of building them a little bit higher. But if you're talking about different areas and different options, you could take the Veterans Memorial Park here. Right now what we're showing is the ground elevation tied into here at about 12 in the street, tying into flood wall at 11 feet, and then into a bulkhead. Now, this flood wall in the park would then be covered by earth, basically grass. What you see there, they would look like the same park, just higher. There are other options here that we're going to pursue. Instead of the flood wall through underground there, underground meaning a raised ground elevation, could we consider a bulkhead here, a line of protection, and leave the park as is? Could you consider a line of protection inside and allow the park to flood? Those are some of the things we would need to consider.
So walk me through this. Can we start at, does it start, okay, let's start at the bridge, because you're talking about...
Well, here, if you see the blue line and the red line, those are existing elevations. The red line is 13 feet. The blue line is 11 feet. So if you get an idea of if the tide came in to 13 feet, it's going to reach that red line. Comes into 11 feet, it's going to reach that blue line.
Oh, I see. That's not the actual elevation now. That's just if the tide came up to those elevations.
Yeah, that is the actual ground,
ground
elevation on those lines.
That's where the tide would stop. Okay, got it.
So everything on this side of the line would flood up to that elevation. So the street elevation here is about 11 feet, and that's where we tie into.
Now, where's Bar's Restaurant? That is, where's the bridge? The bridge is
over here.
Right here. So what is there protection in front of Bar's Restaurant, or are they high enough?
Right now, there's no line of protection, probably because they may be high enough, their first floor. I'm really not sure. We have to see that. If they're not, I would imagine since we came this way to tie to high ground, there probably weren't significant damages to this area, but we could check that again. And
well, they got some water damage. I know I was out there the next day, and they were drying out their chairs and stuff. Now they have sort of a basement area that goes out to their outside deck on the river, so that might be it. And the rest of the restaurant is raised.
Yeah, this is an area we'll have to look at and see why we tied in this way. Why the design engineer choose this alignment and not around this way. And there'll be reasons for that, and maybe there are options to go outside, and we'll consider those if they're feasible.
Okay, so then as we move along from Veterans Park, this is Bulkhead.
Yeah, this is Bulkhead here. Now the green dots, someone did ask about those in the meeting. That was because we were looking at non-structural solutions there, meaning we're looking to possibly elevate some of those structures.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time we had a fabricated flood wall removable going inside. And then we would need to flood-proof or elevate these structures. Now we have to look at these structures. There still may be options to do something inside here in combination with this bulkhead, depending on the height.
Okay, and then this bulkhead moves along here, and then it becomes the beach, right? Is that Miller Beach, or where is that?
Yeah, Miller Street here. That's the beach in the Miller.
Right, and some other private
and-
property beaches.
Yeah, I realize there's some pieces of bulkhead, some docks, but generally it's beach.
And so this would be a raised dune with a bulkhead underneath it, buried
Yeah,
underneath it.
well, there's some beach and there's some grassy area throughout here.
Okay.
So we'd have to tie into whatever exists and make it look the same, just higher. And that would have an interior hard structure.
Okay, and then more bulkhead, and then another beach with a dune.
Now, an area like this where you have homes here, similar to Gravelly Point,
Mm-hmm.
is there a possibility where the locals would consider a bulkhead on the inside here,
I see.
and then have beach over here, and allowing that area to still get wet and unprotected and have access over? Or is it important to have a dune-looking structure?
I think this is Honeysuckle Lodge, and I think the clam deporation plant is right there on the corner.
That's correct.
All right, so that is one half. What about the other part of the town here? We're going to move over here now, and we've actually moved from the last point right there. Now that is
Clam hut.
that was the clam hut, and there was a marina in there, and they got wiped out. So we're looking at bulkheads there too.
Yeah, yeah. There's still bulkhead alignment that would go here and tie into the existing state sheet pile bulkhead, which would be capped. Now, this area here, I realize that there's a small marina here that's privately owned.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have to consider what to do here and meet with them. We actually received an email from them, and we will respond back to them and figure out what to do.
Okay. Now this is an interesting challenge, isn't it? This is a very small, narrow marina, and I've been in that marina with my boat and other boats. Are you going to make it even smaller when you put bulkheads in?
Yeah, the plan we have right now is to provide a bulkhead on the inside alignment of the existing bulkhead. Actually, that's the case for many of the bulkheads.
How
here.
much will that take up? A foot, foot and a half, 2 feet?
1.5 to 2 feet, depending on the top surface, all the way around. And we did consider a closure gate here, but the cost of a closure gate, when you include operation and maintenance, costs more than the bulkhead around.
All right. Okay. Bulkhead. We're looking at Marine Place here, right, where there is a bulkhead.
Yeah, and we'll cap that bulkhead where it's in good enough shape, and if it's deteriorated, needs to be replaced, we'll replace it.
Okay. Now this is this the rec
Yeah,
center?
it's a community center here.
Community
South Harbor Ave. There's an existing walkover there,
Oh yeah.
and if you stand on that walkover and look down, you could see a very large valve.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look upstream of that creek, you could see a couple outfalls with existing valves there as well. Now they're old, and especially the one out here, I remember as a kid that was always open. I think that's stuck. So these are things to consider here. We would have some kind of closure structure there. You'd still have a walkover, and you have a beach here. The beach is pretty wide here, so you could still have the enough room to slope up and then slope back down and maintain that high elevation for the level protection.
Okay. And now here is now a beach close to my heart. This is the Gravelly Point beach here. We're actually taping in a house right in this area. What do we do about Gravelly Point?
Well, Gravelly Point right now, since it has existing beach, we try to match the land use that exists. So we do have the same beach type dune here with an interior hard structure. And this is an example where we have an opportunity. Would the residents here rather see a bulkhead closer to the homes and have access over it and still have your beach? Or would you rather have a beach that slopes up and slopes down? And I think to answer that question, you probably need to know what are the use restrictions of that property once it's got a flood wall in there. And those are the answers we want to come back with.
Well,
and
one of the
give you those
questions was at the meeting was if some of these beaches, as a result of the dunes or bulkheads or anything else, it takes away part of the beach. Could part of the plan be to pump in some sand so that we have, at least enough beach to make it feel like it hasn't been lost?
Well, again, we want to maintain the existing use. Now, if there's not enough room to build this dune structure here, then maybe it's not a possibility to build that. This will look like a beach. It'll just have.
But it might be less of a beach. Because if you do a dune that's like say 10 feet tall or something like that, like you say, you got to have the nice, easy sloping sides. People don't necessarily, sunbathe on a hill,
Right.
although they could. So you lose some of the beach. Could we? Is anything in your plan say that we need to pump in sand to any of these beaches?
At this time, no, we don't have that in our plan.
Okay. But we could suggest that.
And again, those are when we come out here with different options, we'll get answers to those questions. Right now, we do not have a beach fill plan because that's considered a recreational feature if it's for
Okay.
that purpose.
Okay.
If it were for protection purposes, they're different. We may bring in sand to build that structure if there's not enough fill there.
Well, I'd say it's not only recreational. In some cases, it's economical. I mean, our beaches are to attract people.
Well, yeah,
as well.
economical regionally, but
Yeah.
not nationally.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
There's certain benefits we're not allowed to claim recreational benefits.
Any peculiar problems or issues with Sea Streak and their docking there? Is that pretty straightforward?
I think it's pretty straightforward. I think they could still have access up and over. They have a line of protection already. I mean, they have a bulkhead. It's the same as everywhere else. Where it'd be higher, and you have to make sure the people are able to get from their parking lot over the wall to the boat. Just keep the same land use.
And so we same thing with the so-called Connors Beach, and then we have.
Are these
Now
still?
this is interesting. There's where the original oyster used to be, in that marina. That's not protected.
Well, let's go back to here.
Okay.
Because there are options here. Is this still the Anchorage Apartments, or they changed the name?
No, well, I'm not sure.
But they have an existing bulkhead there that's pretty
Okay.
low. You could elevate
I've
that and
seen it.
provide access over, and they still have their beach here.
Okay.
And with Connors, there was enough space there to create the dune system.
Okay.
Now, it may be that we could do the bulkhead here and just keep the beach on the water side of the bulkhead.
Gotcha.
There's enough room to do either or, and I believe bulkheads are actually more cost effective anyway.
Okay.
Now, behind Arson Edge, you have a existing ground there, some beach, some sort of, dune grassy type area, beach grass, and into the parking lot. So there's enough room to provide the existing type ground surface there, elevated. Again, there's options there. Maybe a bulkhead back here and have all that space for beach if there's access.
Now I don't get this. Tell me about the whole, the marina there and Shadow Lawn. Why isn't? I know there's a bulkhead there. It looks like an old one, but why isn't that bulkhead coming out?
There's still a lot of unknowns here in this area because of the future land use.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what's going to happen here, and I don't know that anybody does. Just
Well, I
yet.
can guess. We're looking at that to kind of be the Chelsea Pier or South Street Seaport of Highlands. I mean, it's whether it's use right now or future use 20 years from now. Does it cost that much more to protect that area by bringing the bulkhead out?
It's actually the line of protection. As you increase the length, it will cost more. If you have the line of protection coming all the way out and around,
Yeah.
it will cost more than this, obviously.
Okay.
Right now, there's enough ground surface here to provide a raised ground surface that could be driven over and still access this area. Now, the owners here may decide they don't want this area to get wet and propose tying it off here. But right now, there's not a lot of activity there, so I don't know what kind of benefits we could claim if there's nothing happening.
Well, I mean, it's virgin land. It's perfect. I mean, you've got the marina, you've got the people who want to build there. My sense is that people would very much want to protect that. I mean, this over here, if I may put my finger in here, is prime real estate. This is a beautiful view, Bowling Point, and I've always been jealous of those trailers until the hurricane struck, of course. It seems to me a no-brainer.
Yeah, actually, I'm very familiar with this area. I grew up in the house right about here. 25 Locust Street. It's not there anymore. So I spent a lot of time with the children in this area when I was a kid.
So let's protect it.
Well, right now, the line of protection is that if we're looking at the existing use right now, there's nothing there.
Right.
So,
Oh, there's some bulkheads.
yeah, until we have something to protect, we really need to have more discussions with the town on this. It's possible whoever develops the land here could provide the elevation high enough anyway. If they provide a high enough elevation and line of protection here on their own, then we could tie in here.
Yeah.
And our project stops here as long as they tie in to high ground up here. So these houses were demolished, so that they're shown out of the line of protection, but really there's nothing there. So this is considered all the same future land use as a kind of a big question mark.
Now you talked about some roads being raised, I thought at some point.
Right here,
And what road is that?
that's Locust Street, at the end of Locust
Okay,
Street.
that would be raised. And anything else?
And then on the other end of town,
Okay, let's go back to that.
by Veterans Park, it actually does elevate a little bit up here, up to that blue line, which is 11 feet. So we're looking to take where it's elevated there and keep the elevation higher up to the park. And there'll be some access issues to deal with there for the businesses.
Good. Well, this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. The look will change. If there's a plan in place, the town will look different. Whether that's dramatic or not depends on the person, their opinions. There are access issues. When you build a wall, I mean, you say 14 feet on the down end. I guess if it is low tide, that's something to consider. But right now, they could be climbing down 10 feet, 12 feet. So they still have different access issues where there are bulkheads. As far as, and the most challenging part would be the boat access, I agree. Not necessarily the people getting up and over the wall with walkways, but launching boats. That presents a challenge because you have to have enough room to get a vehicle with a boat over a certain elevation and then back down into the water. That'll present our biggest access challenge for sure. Now, beach access, I would look at the example in Snug Harbor Ave, where you have the walkway going over the creek. That bulkhead is high enough, and there's a creek there, so you don't just access the beach by jumping over the wall. There's a walkway there. I would consider that an example of the types of walkways you could see over the beaches, over the bulkheads. You just have stairs up, a walkway over, stairs back down. Private property is something that our local partner, led by the state, and the town as a sub-partner, will have to deal with those real estate access issues and providing easements. We will need two types of easements for projects. One for temporary, for construction, which is a larger area during construction, and then permanent easements. If we have a bulkhead there in place or a raised ground elevation, we need a permanent easement there so we can maintain it. Actually, the state will maintain it, but we will inspect it and repair it. People will still have access. They can still use those areas, but there'll be certain restrictions. They can't build on top of what we have, where we have a flood wall. If we have a raised ground elevation, they can't put something there. They'll have to work. That'll all be worked out locally, non-federal, what the conditions are of those easements. But they will be significant because there are, and I was surprised that there are so many private properties that actually go into the water. So in order for us to construct a project here, we're going to have to coordinate with many, many property owners. Well, again, you're talking about a certain elevation that the water is coming up to. So you need to protect against that. So your line of protection needs to be at that elevation or greater, depending on what event you're protecting against. Now, your view, depending on where you stand, and where your first floor elevation is, or where you're looking at your view from. To say that there's one idea better than others, I did mention at the meeting that there really are not bad ideas when it comes to reducing risk. It's just the trade-off is certain solutions are cost effective, certain solutions are not, and are the solutions worth the lost view, or is the view worth the risk of future flooding? So it's very difficult not to impact the view in the topography of Highlands. Again, you have to come up to that certain elevation. There are things you can do. For instance, on Marine Place, where the state had the sheet pile bulkhead a little bit higher, they built platforms where people could stand and then see over, go fishing over those. You could have things similar to that. You could have raised walkways adjacent to the bulkhead where people could still see from the bulkhead. But it is true, if you're driving down Seadrift Avenue towards that bulkhead and you're in your car, you can't see the water right now. Short of raising that entire road, you won't get the view. In your scenario of 700 homes, uh, the project that we are proposing would protect more than 700 homes. It would also protect infrastructure and business and the businesses. So it's not really comparing apples to apples. We do have a non-structural alternative that we look at, and as I mentioned, it's not cost effective. However, it does not mean that a lower level non-structural plan could not be pursued. I'll give you an example for Leonardo. A structural solution was not cost effective there because they didn't have as many structures flooded to justify a project there. So what we're looking at there are elevating the homes. Now, it's cost effective to a point. It's probably not cost effective for 700 homes, but it may be where you analyze all those homes. We have algorithms, we have programs to identify non-structural solutions based on the first floor elevation, the future projected damages, and there would be a cost-effective solution to recommend to Congress for a non-structural plan for a number of homes. Leonardo is the example. There were 65 homes that were considered in the damage area, 65, I believe. Of that, after optimizing and recommending a solution there, it was 19 homes that were considered cost-effective. And we were going forward with that report to completion pre-Sandy. Now, unfortunately, Sandy impacted those homes, so we're backing up and looking at that area again as well. So there is an option for non-structural solution here if the town wanted to go that route, but it will not protect all the homes or businesses. If there are alternatives to go around that area um, to avoid that litigation, we could do that. However, in this type of solution, it's very difficult to go around. For a beach project, you could skip a section, and they're not protected. For line of protection, you can't. One opening, the project is not functional. So the town would have to weigh that their own benefit cost, political benefit and costs in a way. Do they want to pursue eminent domain? If it's a small area, if it's many homeowners, it's really a choice for the local politicians. No. Another common misconception is that if we provide protection here in Highlands, where is that floodwater going to go? It'll spread out into down the Shrewsbury River and flood Seabright. That's a misconception. The simple answer is it's going to go back into the Atlantic Ocean. And if you spread out the surface area of Highlands into the Atlantic Ocean, you're not raising the elevation of water in your adjacent communities in a tidal system. You do have, if you have a hard structure and you do have some waves, I would say on the example on the west side of town where you do tie off and there may be a little bit more wave action there because it's open, you do have to take into consideration the wave action in the adjacent areas. But there's ways to protect against that and displace that energy so you don't cause damage. All the projects we look at and analyze, whether it be tidal or fluvial, we do have to examine impacts to other areas. We can't induce flooding as a result of our project. Fluvial solutions, river solutions, may impact upstream and downstream communities. Tidal solutions will not impact the adjacent communities in the area. Highlands, I mean, the solutions for Highlands, we've built bulkheads in North Jersey, for instance, in Newark Bay. We have proposed projects very close to construction in Union Beach and in Port Monmouth. Those are beach fill and levees, but the levees act similar to the flood walls, and it is a tidal system there as well. As our project engineer mentioned in the meeting, there are no innovative solutions here. Bulkheads, flood walls, berms are all proven engineering methods to prevent tide water from coming in. We are seeking examples from other districts, primarily New Orleans district, because they have a very low-lying area in many projects, and they were funded quite a bit after Katrina. for examples, completed projects to show what kind of walkovers they have. Do they have the same issues as us? Well, again, the period of analysis is 50 years. If properly maintained, the project could last well over 50 years. As I mentioned, in upstate New York, we have projects going on 100 years because we will come in and repair those when they're damaged during storm events. Now, the life of a sheet pile steel bulkhead is roughly 20 years. That's why the ones you see on Marine Place are starting to corrode. Uh, our bulkheading would be sheet pile capped by concrete to protect it against corrosion, so it'll last longer. Now, again, if there's damages during the period of analysis and beyond, we'll come back and repair those. But I would expect the initial construction with the concrete cap to last the 50-year period of analysis. The topography of Highlands is such that when you tie off on either end of town, you're very close to the high ground, and you have that line of protection. If one side of the town was not to be constructed, you'd have to tie off somewhere through the middle of town, and that'd be difficult to do. You know, if you consider where we have line of protection coming from the west end of the town into the middle of town, say near Snug Harbor Ave, could you tie off into Waterwitch? Engineering, you could design a solution for that. Engineers could design it. It's probably not cost effective. It's probably not an acceptable solution. So I would say, given the topography of this town, you're not looking at pieces that could be built without others. It's the system. You've brought up two examples, Inlet Cafe and Windansea, and they're actually two very extreme examples, with Inlet Cafe being on the ground surface at street level and Windansea elevated really above the floodplain where their view would not be impacted at all. Outside of Windansea, you could picture the bulkheads would be higher. It still would not impact the view from the dining area, which is the second floor at Windansea. Now, the outdoor area, I'm sure there's options that could be done out there where you could have on the inside of the bulkhead, it's possible they could have basically a deck built up where you can still dine out there and still see over the bulkhead. Well, again, I would say we're avoiding movable parts here for a couple of reasons. O&M, operation maintenance cost, is one reason to avoid movable parts. And that is a responsibility of the state and then down to the town to maintain and operate those. So that's a decision that is local. And the state has made it clear that they would like to avoid those. A situation like that, it's the liability of a much larger risk of a problem in a system like this where you have an open gate, for instance, like you mentioned, that is open almost year-round, drive through, back and forth, no issues. Storm comes, you want to close it. If that malfunctions and they can't get it closed in time, whoever's responsible for closing that water will come in and inundate the whole system. And that is a high-risk feature. Now, I understand businesses and the community and having that view and dining on the water. And that's sort of a trade-off that businesses are going to have to make. Windansea elevated, and I know that's expensive. I believe they were required to from FEMA years ago. Inlet Cafe has choices. Is it possible that that the line of protection come behind if there's room and there's a cluster of places that don't want a wall in front? If they accept the risk of flooding, you could have the line of protection out on the other side where they would be subject to damages. But they would accept that risk in exchange for water views and having that waterfront access. Those are some of the questions we want to answer when we go out to meet with those specific stretches of protection where there is possibility to do that. We'll show them that possibility. Shrewsbury Avenue is a good example because one of our prior plans had all those homes that were right on the bulkhead elevated and a fabricated flood wall which is removable on basically where the sidewalk and road is. Now, there were a lot of reasons to eliminate that plan, and one of them was because of the movable parts of a flood wall and the high liability and high risk of a removable part in a system. But it does not mean that If that whole group absolutely did not want protection, would they accept something else? Is there enough room to raise the road in that area where the water side would still be subject to damages, but you could still protect the rest? I don't have that answer yet because we have to do the engineering to see what fits where. But absolutely, if there's an opportunity and it's cost effective to change the alignment where somebody on the other side would accept that risk. Um, I would say there's still quite a bit of time. It depends on how significant of a change we're looking for, because even after a feasibility study into detailed design, we could still tweak changes at that point, but not significant. If there are real estate considerations, if the change requires a different easement and you need to obtain those easements, those are types of decisions we'd like to make before the feasibility study ends. So the easements don't need to be acquired until we go to construction, uh, but the point of no return, I would say sometime in 2014, we're going to need to at least lean towards a pretty solid alignment of where we're going, and we need to know where the significant real estate issues are, so that if we do move forward, we know if there's other alternatives there, and we could provide that to the state and the town to say, this is what we recommend. There's big real estate impacts over here where we may not get easements. If we don't get them, this is another plan we could do, and that's a possibility. Or we could tell them where the significant areas are that could stop a project. I know there are going to be a lot of real estate easements required. It'll be a big list for the town to pursue. I would say it would be similar to what you see when you are further south in New Jersey, where there's dunes. When you drive up to the beach and you park, you'll see a dune. Spring Lake has a system of dunes, not built by the Corps, by the way. But when you park there on Ocean Avenue in Spring Lake, what you see is a dune and a boardwalk, and you don't see the water until you get up and over. It would be similar here. If you were to drive down Gravelly Point Road here, right now I could see the water coming down the road. If there were a dune there, you would see a dune. Uh, you're correct. You do need the space, and you do need to gradually rise up and back down for a dune. Now, I don't know what the regulatory rules will be with a constructed dune with a flood wall in there yet. Those are questions that would need to be answered. Could you, could people access it? Can they just access over it, or can they actually sit on it and use it? I don't know those answers yet, and those are questions that need to be answered. Uh, in certain areas here, even here in Gravelly Point Road, when we meet with the local communities who use those beaches, those are some of the options we'll look at. We could explain to better what the dune will look like. We could walk with them and show them here's where the ground elevation exists. We'll be going up to this level here and back down. We could walk that with tape measures and depictions and show the locals what it will look like. And if there are other options that are considered here that are still feasible, we could show those as well. For instance, Gravelly Point Road could have a bulkhead closer to the landward side with the beach on the other side. Again, you still need that access up and over, but then once you get over that bulkhead, you'd still have the existing beach you have now. It depends on the land use. You have to show me the area, but there's opportunities. If there's enough room, you could have the line of protection. Say it's in a parking lot of a public marina, for instance. You could have a bulkhead tie off into the parking lot, and the parking lot would be large enough to where you could have a raised ground surface elevation where vehicles coming in could go up to that elevation 11 to 13 feet and then back down and access the boat ramp. Now that area on the water side of that raised ground surface elevation would not be protected in a storm event. And the same thing for marinas. We want to, at the very least, we want to maintain the existing waterfront use and make sure that the local community could still use the waterfront the way they did before. Now there will be changes, but where there's boat access, we want to maintain boat access. Where there's dock access, we want to maintain that. We want to maintain beach access. Getting to and from will be different, but we want to maintain it. Now, future land use, where you're discussing That's something the town should discuss with us of where they want it and can we engineer a solution for them. And it's quite possible we could. Well, we're already started with our engineering team looking at access issues and creating depictions of what it would look like here. So we could come back as soon as possible based on what areas they could provide sooner than later. Now, some areas are a little easier where there are not access issues, where the water is just up to the bulkhead and it's marine place would be a good example. So our engineers are focused first on the most difficult issues. I'd say Shrewsbury Avenue is difficult because the private property is right there at the bulkhead. The marinas and businesses on the water are difficult access issues, and we need to provide options. So our next step is to provide those options where we see different solutions and different ideas and significant access issues to cover or real estate issues to cover. We're going to start meeting with those locals as we develop solutions. We want to go there with answers in hand, and we'll work through the town to do that. Now, while we're doing that, we're still designing the entire project, and we still plan to complete the draft report by the end of the next calendar year and submit to Congress. I'm sorry, actually, we just submit to our headquarters. We don't need congressional approval for this study. We will have our public meeting in March. Hopefully, we'll have a lot more answers to the questions that were asked at this meeting. We will review a lot of the questions we had. Ideally, what I'd like to do is, we've gotten some written questions too, and I'd like to take all those questions, provide written answers to those, and post them on a site so that everyone could read what questions were asked of us both at the meeting and in writing, and they could see those answers. So the next time there's a public meeting, some people have the opportunity to review those before we go out. And of course, we'll have a lot more information on the access, a lot more information on the interior drainage. We do need to show depictions better, and we could do that in two ways. We could show computer effects on the existing landscape of what it looks like, and we're going to do that where we can. And also show examples of other projects throughout the country where they have a similar looking bulkhead and what has been done there to provide view or access. So we're going to show some of those in March, if not sooner. For Marine Place, what that would look like right now, roughly based on what we think the elevation is from walking out there, you're looking about 2 feet higher, and it would be capped in concrete, where it wouldn't be a sheet pile wall, would look like a concrete wall, and that's to protect against corrosion. It's very general, rough order of magnitude. You're looking at the same elevation roughly throughout the system. I know it varies from the west side to east side based on wave impacts and on the west side, but it's difficult to answer that because even just one beach, for example, the community center, Snug Harbor Avenue Beach, it depends on where you're standing on that beach. It goes from the water and it goes up to the community center. I don't know the spot elevations of all that area. I would say if you consider Sandy, the Sandy event, everyone knows roughly what the water line was. Where that water came up in a house, where it came up on a wall, outside, how high up to the beach it came, up a tree. If that were roughly about elevation 13, that would be a good comparison to say somewhere about here, a little bit lower. That's the best example I could give right now, sitting here. It's a technically feasible plan. I think there's a good opportunity for this project to get built with enough support. The changes are different. The town will look different. It's up to the people who live here now to decide if this is what they want. And I don't live here anymore. But I still love this town.